Hi, my name is Amanda Brown of Fabric Heart. Today I'm bringing you a tutorial on how you can make your very own tuft floor pillows. As we get older, they tell us that we should spend more time getting up off the floor. And sometimes seating is at a premium, or sometimes I just like different places to sit. So I wanted to make some tuft floor pillows that are nice and cushy and comfy to have around my place to use when the mood strikes. So join me today with some of my favorite OLFA tools while we make this tuft floor pillow together. I was excited about this project because I've been looking for a way to use up some of my oddly shaped, unusable batting scraps that I get from all the quilts that I made. And I was able to fill this with mostly my batting scraps, some foam pieces that I have from another project, and then just some polyfill on top. I'm trying to reduce my footprint as a sewist, and being able to put little teeny tiny scraps to use is right up my alley. Material wise for this project, I'm going to use a velvet for my floor cushion. You could use anything else like an upholstery fabric. I got it into my mind that I wanted velvet floor cushions, so we're going with that. I think it's probably not the wisest choice, but sometimes when you get a good deal on fabric, you just need to follow your heart. For the inside, I will use some polyfill, but I also have some offcuts of my quilt batting from different quilts that I'm going to cut up into little pieces. And I also have some foam that I use for some cushions, and I'm going to cut those up into small pieces. So the three things combined to fill my cushion. I'm also going to use covered buttons that I get to cover in my own fabric. You can get those at many sewing stores in a variety of sizes. I'm going to use 4 buttons for this project. So for tools, I'm going to need a large scale darning needle, my favorite 45mm OLFA rotary cutter, paired with my 7-inch Serrated-Edge stainless steel scissors. I love these because they're pretty hardcore, and I'm going to use these to cut up my foam pieces. My 36 by 24 OLFA self-healing cutting mat, my 24-inch by 6-inch OLFA ruler, and I need some clips or pins, but it's a pretty straightforward project tool-wise. I might add in my Appliqué scissors. My OLFA Appliqué scissors seem to come into almost every project that I make. Just a couple more tools that you're going to need, or supplies. I'm using baker's twine. Ideally, you would get a thin nylon rope, which you can get at most crafting stores. I just happened to be out of it, and I thought this baker's twine would do in a pinch, which it does. I'm also going to use like fishing line. It's clear. It's hard to see on camera, so I apologize for that, but it's nice and strong and easy to move through the tufting process. So I like using that. This is more of an upholstery darning needle. It has like a cobra flange on it. I like using this sometimes. Other things you could use is a chopstick. I use the chopstick a lot just to locate holes straight down through, and you can like tape your wire or your string to the end of your chopstick and pull it through. One thing that I use a lot in this video, this is a drawstring threader, and it has 2 eyes on one end, and you can pull your drawstring through hoodies or waistbands, but I use this to pull my threads through my cushion. Using my 45mm OLFA cutter and my ruler and my mat, I'm going to cut out 2 30 by 30 inch squares, which there isn't a ruler long enough, so we are going to use the squares on lines on our OLFA mat. When you are doing a large piece cut, sometimes you don't have an option but to use the lines on your mat, and it's great that they're there. First off, I'm going to fold my fabric in half so that it fits on the mat. That's the biggest reason why we fold this. But when you're folding your fabric, when you have a large piece of fabric, you want to get it as flat as possible, and you want to watch out to make sure that it's not off grain, off kilter. So the way that I do that is I lay one half down flat, and I just don't want to see like lines, diagonal lines in here where the fabric's starting to buckle. And that's where it's not straight. So when you have this fold here nice and straight, everything should lie flat. So I'm going to bring up and make sure I do have a piece here that is shorter than the top piece. So I'm going to make sure that that piece is slightly off the mat. And I'm using this fold, I'm lining it up on one of my lines, but not the edge line, so that I can still see my numbers. Lining it up and making sure that it's nice and flat all the way across. And then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up on my 30-inch line. Making sure the top numbers or the top line and the bottom line that are off the fabric, I can see that they're nice and straight. And then I'm going to give that a cut. Since we know that our other edge is off the mat, because I had to account for the under part being a little too short or a little shorter, I'm now going to flip it over and cut the other side so it's nice and square as well. And you have that lined up. Line up your 30-inch line, top and bottom. Give that a cut. Now we know that this piece is 30 inches wide, and then we want to make it 30 inches square. So I'm going to open this up and fold it in the opposite direction. And now here we have a selvage here, and I'm going to cut that off first because there's a lot of holes in it. It's a different kind of weave, so you don't want to include the selvage in your projects. It doesn't move and behave the same way as the other fabric on the... I'm going to cut off the selvage and a little extra, just so we know we're getting a nice straight or a nice finished edge that is all going to behave the same way as the rest of the material. Put that aside. Now I'm going to flip this piece over so that I can cut 30 inches. Ooh, make sure your blades guard's down. Cut that off. And now we have one 30 by 30 inch square. And we're going to repeat that so we have two of these. Now I have two 30 by 30 inch squares, and we're going to sew them together with the right sides facing. I'm working with velvet and it's special in so many ways. So I'm going to make sure that I clip these together really nice and secure so that I am not worried about it slipping while I'm sewing it together. I often do this by starting with the four corners and getting those clipped and then dealing in halves. So one corner here, two corners, three, and four. And then I'm gonna work with a couple on each side. They tend to velvet kind of slips a lot, and then the layers don't line up. So I like to clip it to make sure that it will at least have hope of all sticking together. And when I go to sew this, I'm going to use a walking foot, which is fancy. It's a fancy word for, or it's a fancy foot where it helps feed your fabric through top and bottom at the same rate. On your sewing machine, there are feed dogs on the bottom, and that pulls your fabric through. But when you have thicker fabric or slippery fabric, it means that the bottom is going in quicker than the top. So when you can have a walking foot, it has feed dogs kind of on top, and that helps feed all the fabric through at the same rate, top and bottom. So you have less likelihood of it coming apart. And sewing this together, I'm going to use a polyester thread that is super strong, just because these are floor cushions, so there's going to be a lot of people just flopping down on them. So I want to make sure that they're nice and secure. So now that I have this on here, I can go and I can sew these together. I have my layers all pinned together, and now it's time for me to sew. I'm going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance using my walking foot to keep all the layers nice and even together. And then I'm going to leave probably about 6 inches in the middle of one of the sides open and so on, so that we can flip it right side out. So I'm using the right side of my foot as a guide, keeping it on the edge so that I hit the 1/2 inch mark. When I get to the corner, I'm going to stop 1/2 inch from the edge, and I'm going to lift my foot and turn my whole project and start sewing again along the other side. I'm sewing the last side, and I'm going to make sure that I leave at least 6 inches open. And I've left a chunk open so that I can flip it right side out. I have everything sewn together, and now I'm going to just trim the corners to remove some of the bulk. So I cut it across the diagonal like that, and then I just trim down the sides a little bit as well on each of the quarters. I knew I would end up using these in this project. I always use my applique scissors in almost every project. Now we're going to find the opening, and then we're going to flip our floor cushion right side out. And then take a moment to poke out all those corners. And now it's ready to be stuffed. There are so many options for stuffing your pillow, your floor cushion. You could just use the polyfill, but I wanted a project where I could use a bunch of my cast-offs, my leftover batting scraps. And so I'm just taking the time to cut these up into little pieces carefully. I know it looks a little haphazard, but I think it's just the camera angle. I am very careful not to cut my fingers. But this is kind of a lot of fun, just to throw caution to the wind and cut my strips into little pieces. They don't have to be uniform, they don't have to be super tiny. I just don't want them to go in a large strip that will ball up. Then I'm going to take my 7-inch OLFA serrated stainless steel scissors, and I really love these. These will go through almost anything. And I'm just going to cut up my foam into smaller pieces. These are pieces of like high density foam that I had used to make some other cushions, and it leaves you, because I made a round one, it leaves you with all these extra pieces, and this stuff is expensive. I just feel like it needs to be used in something. So this was a perfect opportunity. I'm just going to take handfuls and put them in and try to make sure that I'm working them into the corners. I've gotten this pretty full, and this is all just batting scraps and little pieces of foam that I had extra. But I think I'm going to grab my polyfill to give it some poofiness and a little bit more of a luxurious feel. And now I'm just going to put this polyester, like poly stuffing, polyfill on top, and that's going to give it a nice, you don't want it too overfilled, because we're going to tuft this next, and that's going to bring the layers together. You want to make sure that you have some room left so that you're not, one, that it's a little bit easier to tuft, but also that it has room to squish. We want some squish. Next up, we have to close this up, and you might have a favorite way of doing this. I like to use, they call it a ladder stitch. So I like to start a little bit back further, because you can see it's starting to pull apart here. So I like to start a little further back, and I have a double stranded thread, and there's a knot at one end. And I like to start a little further back because these stitches do kind of pull out. And so I've come in one side, and so I'm going to go directly across in, and then along the inside, and then back out just like a centimeter away, 1/4 of an inch, maybe. And then you go in directly across from that stitch in this second side, and you repeat on the other side, and then pull that together. And keep going like that. So I'm going to go directly. Sometimes you have to kind of pull it together. Go in 1/4 of an inch, and then pull. And so that pulled together, and now I can start to pull the stitches that were already there to tighten them up, and then I'll tie them off later. So in, across, pull, and keep doing that all the way across. And see, this is the magic of the ladder stitch. When you start to pull on it, it pulls it tight together and you can't see those stitches at all. You can just see all this extra thread that is from the stitches that were underneath that I'm sewing over. My pillow is closed. I have closed off the seam, and now it's time to tuft. And so we have to figure out where we want to put the buttons. I feel like I like to have them as even as possible, but closer to the corners so that we get a little bit of a bubble up in the middle. We need to mark our spots. You can do that with a marking pencil, but I find with something this large, I like to just use a pin to stick it straight in so that I can visually see if I'm on the right spot or not. One way that I like to find the corner is take a piece of string and hold it on one corner, and then take it all the way across diagonal and hold the string on the second corner and pull it tight, and that gives you a nice straight diagonal line across the entirety of the pillow. And then you can mark along that line. We'll start there. I've marked one pin along that diagonal line and then a second pin. And now I'm going to use the same piece of string to make sure they're even. So I will measure from this pin to my corner, and then I will make sure that the other corner is the same distance with the end of the string. Once you have these 2 points where you like them, then you're going to repeat the process on the other side for the other 2 points, and make sure that you like how they look and you're ready to tuft. All right, for the tufting part, I'm going to use a big darning needle, or this one is a little bit different. It has a little bit of a cobra shank on it. And we're going to go in on either side of this pin head, and we're going to pull the fishing line tight so it depresses this. Also we need is just a little piece, a couple little pieces of extra fabric, just so it's not pulling right into your material. I'm going to thread this giant needle with some fishing line, and I'm going to go in on one side of this and push in, and then I'm going to go underneath and I'm going to push down until I can feel it on the other side. When you feel the other side, carefully without stabbing yourself, put it all the way through. If you have a longer needle, it's a good time to bring it out. Another thing that I found works really well at this point, if you're having problems, like I'm kind of having problems there, is to take a chopstick and put it in the hole, and then you're going to kind of clear a space for it, your needle to go all the way through. Put this back in, and it should have an easier time finding the opposite side, which I can. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to pull that string through, pull it out the other side, give it an extra couple inches. So now I have string all the way through this end here. I know it's clear, it's hard to see. So I've got that one side done, and now I'm going to cut excess amount for my other side, and I'm going to go in slightly away from where we started. Yep. And this piece here that I have of extra fabric, it's going to go in between once we get it all the way through. Before I pull it too tight, I'm going to sneak this little piece of fabric in to hold it. And then I'm going to flip this over. And then I'm going to pull it tight as well. At this point, sometimes it's easier to have a friend or a spool of thread. So you kind of want to pull it tight. But what I also like to do is if I put my spool of thread under it, it kind of holds it, but it also lets me gather it a little bit more. And to start off, I'm just doing a simple knot to hold it in place. Once you have that tied a couple times, you turn it over and you will have a nice divot in your pillow. And we're going to do that in all 4 points. This time I'm going to use the drawstring threader, and I'm going to lead with the solid, more thick end and not the eyes. And it pops through nicely, especially if you pre-cut those holes. You can see where it's going to come out. Straight across, and then we just poke a little hole and bring it out. And oop, pull it through. Once we do one side, we do the next. And I'm going to take that through the exact same hole. So now I'm going to take this and pull it through. I have 2 ends here. I'm going to cut a piece of fabric to go in here. At this point, I'm going to take, because I can see here better, I'm going to take this needle, I'll put it here, and get one of these into its own little hole. Do a simple knot to get it started. Pushing down on that spool of thread to give you some tension, and tie a couple more knots there. Okay, number 2 done. 2 more. There are many different types of buttons that you can get, that you can cover. Some, the top has like teeth along the inside and you hook the fabric around it. They typically have 2 parts like this, a front and then the back, and it has a little loophole on it. So it just really depends on what button you get. This one came, the pack that I originally got came with this tool that you use. You put the button in here with your fabric over top, and then this one goes on top of it, and then you push them together and they snap together. So there's a couple different types, but you kind of get one chance, as far as I can tell, with putting them together. There's often on the back of the packages, or there's instructions, but I find no matter what I do, I cut the fabric wrong, or I cut it the exact right size. It still doesn't work. So this is my chaotic method. I take my fabric, I have the nap side, or the good side, is going to go into my tool first, and I'm going to take this and snap it in. So once I do that, all the fabric, excess fabric, is up top here. And this is too much excess fabric. I'm going to cut, so there's about 1/4 inch of fabric. I'm going to use my OLFA applique scissors to just trim that down. You don't want to cut off too much, but like this here, this chunk here, that's too much left behind. So make sure that you get that out, because sometimes you'll think you've popped it in, but if there's too much fabric underneath, then it's going to pop out. So now I have that in there, and I'm going to take the back and put it in on top, and then I'm going to use this tool, which it looks just like a pop bottle or juice bottle cap, and I'm going to push it down, and it takes a little bit of oomph. Oh geez, Louise. Oh yeah, you can feel it pop in. And now when you look at it like this, I can see that the fabric's all squished into the seam allowance or into the button. And you pull it out, pop it out, and you have a beautiful button in whatever fabric that you want. If you're using a lightweight fabric, you might want to interface it first. So this button is ready to go onto our pillow. I have all 4 places tufted now. It's looking pretty cool, and now it's time to put our buttons on. For this part of it, I'm going to use some baker's twine for this part. You could use the same material you're using before. I find the fishing line is slippery to work with, and I like to go in with a second type of string at this point to make sure that we're not going to lose that tuft. So this time it should be a little bit easier because we've already created holes, made the space. I'm going to go back in with my tool for installing drawstrings and go through the same holes as I did last time. Put the string through that, pull it through, and we're going to do that one more time on the other side. There we go. And then put the second side in there and pull that through. Make sure your button isn't all twisted. And that should sit in there nicely. And then we're going to flip it over to tie it in a knot across the bottom. Make sure that you get that fabric in between again, in one direction and then the opposite. Pulling tight each time. And the last thing I like to do, I'm going to take all of these together, tie one big knot. And then you can trim these off. These are going to be on the bottom, so you aren't going to see them. And we have 1 button on. 3 more to go. I was looking for these upholstery needles, and I was unsuccessful in finding them before I recorded most of this video. But I went out shopping again, because who doesn't love a good trip to the fabric store? And I finally found them. These are what is going to make tufting so much easier. They're nice and long, they're sharp, they're going to go through all the layers easily, and it's definitely much easier than the other way that I showed you in this video already. So I'm going to show you how to attach a button using one of these instead of the other tools that we've been using. This is just it, is that this is a project where you can make it work using various tools, and this one just makes life a little bit easier, but if you don't have access to this, then you don't have access to it. So this is a different cushion that I have waiting for buttons, and I'm going to just pop this through all the way to the bottom, and then I can feel it. I can pull it out. I can pull that through, leave one on the other side, and then I'm going to go back and do the other side. I'm going to put my button on here. And then here, and then I'm going to go in on the other side, straight down, flip it around until I can feel where it's coming up. And I'm going to check that my button isn't all twisted. It's looking pretty good there. So I'm going to flip it back over and just make sure that I'm using the piece of fabric there. And tying a couple knots in there. You can do fancy knots or you can do easy knots. I just do simple knots, but I like to do one over and one under. Perfect like that. I'm going to tie a knot in it. Snip off that excess and flip it over. And we have a beautiful button. An upholstery needle, ideal. It's probably like gold star. I had a lot of success with the Drawstring puller threader, the Drawstring threader. I used it backwards, definitely. I led with the thicker end. That worked well. The chopstick is a good tool with a nice, like, big darning needle. But there's always many tools to make the job happen. You just need to pick the one that's accessible to you and works well for you. And once you have installed all 4 buttons, you are ready to enjoy your very new floor pillow. And my kids are already fighting over it already, so there will be more made. Everyone needs a few floor pillows to lounge around on the floor, get some good stretching in, and be nice and comfy. Thanks for joining me today while we made this Tuft floor pillow together.